The ambition and vagaries of this company, I think, are as unprecedented as the money.
There has never been a business that has been both so powerful and so tenuous in its hold on the future as OpenAI, right? Because they are burning unprecedented amounts of cash.
I think they're going to have a device for every scenario and use case. They're going to want to stick one in your home, in your bedroom, in your living room, and in your pocket. Do they have the capacity to execute this, commercialize this? That's a big fat who the hell knows.
I want them to stop pretending that there's an easy answer to what should we do ethically with this thing. The business incentives and the social incentives here, I think, are beginning to diverge.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
I'm Chris Saad.
I'm Jacob Ward.
On today's show, we're going to talk all about the OpenAI live stream, where they revealed a whole bunch of new stuff. Some of it obvious, some of it not so obvious. You have to read between the lines. So Yaniv and I and Jacob are going to go through and dissect everything they talked about, including their plans for massive AI research, for 5-year research projects powered by AI. We're going to talk about ChatGPT as a platform. We're going to talk about their plans to roll out 1 gigawatt of capacity a week in data centers. Crazy numbers. And their nonprofit investments in curing diseases and AI resilience. And then finally, some of the questions they got at the end of their live stream. You don't want to miss that part. It was kind of hilarious. The questions they got were really quite interesting. But we're going to talk about all of that and much, much more on this week's show. Stay tuned.
So we're very lucky on the show today to have Jacob Ward joining us. He is a super experienced journalist and thinker in the space of AI, tech, and society. Jacob, welcome to the Startup Podcast. Why don't you let our listeners know a little bit about you?
Chris, Yaniv, thank you so much for having me. So yeah, like you say, I'm a longtime technology journalist. I was once the editor-in-chief of Popular Science, and then I was technology correspondent for Al Jazeera, then for NBC News, for CNN, at PBS. I've worked a lot of different places. I wrote a book that came out in 2022 called The Loop: How AI is Creating a World Without Choices and How to Fight Back. The whole thesis of that book is that commercial AI is going to have this really powerful effect on our brains and on our society. And I thought I was like 10 years early, you guys. And then boom, 9 months later, ChatGPT came out, which was pretty crazy. So now I spend a lot of my time advising companies on sort of big ethical questions and thinking through this stuff with smart people like you.
Well, we're delighted to have you.
Great to have you on the show. For our first and only topic today, we're going to spend the whole episode dissecting this. It is the live stream from OpenAI that happened this week. It was sort of unceremonious. It was not pre-announced. It was just sort of they jumped on a stream and gave an update. Primarily Sam Altman is the master of ceremonies, and he brought a few other people in. So I'll start to recap some of what they talked about, and maybe I'll stop along the way and get your guys' reactions. At first, he said they wanted to talk about updates in research, product, and infrastructure. And actually, they also gave an update on the non-profit. So let's start with research. They showed a diagram with their product stack. And they showed sort of infrastructure, models, APIs, apps, and so on. And what was interesting to me about that is actually they had third-party apps, sort of this giant puzzle piece on the side that was touching all layers of their stack. And, you know, Yaniv, you and I, we've talked a lot about the idea that OpenAI is a developer-first company. Everything they do is a sort of a reference app or an agitation or an inspiration for the market. And this diagram really made that very clear. They talked about their near-term goals, which was AI-powered research and autonomous research. And this is kind of interesting and mind-blowing. They said that by September of next year, they're expecting that they will have AI research interns that will meaningfully accelerate their internal research and perhaps presumably the research of others. And that by March 2028, which is a very specific month of a year, a couple of years away, they're hoping to have autonomously executed research, large research projects that are executed autonomously, being able to do what they called 5-year work. So work not just for 5 minutes or 50 minutes or, you know, a couple of hours as ChatGPT does now, and it sort of comes back to you. They want to be able to sort of set it off on a task and it works for months or years. It could take up a data center and the data centers may be producing new breakthrough research. And as related to that, they had an engineer sort of come in and talk about the alignment problem and how if AI goes away and works for, hours or months or years, the alignment problem, not just in terms of safety, but in terms of like fulfilling the human's intent well and maintaining that intent over time becomes even more difficult. And he sort of gave a very confusing presentation with a lot of stutters, and he was clearly very nervous. And actually Sam said, yeah, that was hard to follow. So
geez.
I didn't follow it. It was sort of something, I didn't really understand what they were both trying to say, but it was something about, they're thinking about alignment in a new way, and something that's worth digging into. So that's the research part of the live stream. There's a few others I'll touch on, but what are you guys' thoughts on the research part?
Well, I'll just say that, I mean, it is in theory the whole, right, that like the whole point of this project, to hear Sam Altman tell it, is that we're going to get to an era in which his product and products like his are going to be able to do such foundational research so quickly and so cost effectively that we're going to be in a world in which, we're solving, cancer and everyone is extraordinarily wealthy, right? I mean, that is the whole premise. And so it is interesting to finally see some forward progress in theory on the ability to do that. But I also think it's so amazing to watch the continued kind of like, first year university student kind of version of the alignment problem kind of conversation, which is, how do we keep people, focused on the people they want to be, and all this kind of stuff, where if you were to actually, I've been in these presentations before where a group of academics, like, social scientists, political scientists, will sit across the table from a group of people making these foundational models. And the foundational model people will say, we're going to pursue some universal human values. And then the political scientists will all raise their hands and say, what is universal, what is human, and what are values? And the whole meeting implodes, right? And so like, there's something about the scientific ambition is so great, but the scientific experience, at least in the social sciences, is so limited. I'm always really struck by that in these kinds of moments. I mean, the guy was just very nervous, and so that may be what it was, but that's part of the mealy-mouthed quality of it for me.
It does seem to me that OpenAI, Chris, you and I have spoken about this before, that they don't take safety as seriously as they take the power of the models. They do seem to care about it, but the level of sophistication of thought, when you look at these more the social science, more the political science of it, it does feel quite undergraduate when you hear Sam himself talk about these things, right? We discussed that exact point about how can an AI have universal values when there is no such thing as universal values? It feels unsophisticated at the same time as they're building these incredibly sophisticated, incredibly powerful pieces of technology. So there's a mismatch, right? Where the safety aspect of it, the alignment aspect of it feels like it is, undergraduate, where the research side of it is very much postgraduate. And the question is, how does it keep up? And what does it actually mean when we have these very powerful tools that haven't had that sort of subtlety of thought, that depth of understanding applied to them?
I want them to just hand off this research capability to, foundational scientists around the world. And I want them to stop pretending that there's an easy answer to what should we do ethically with this thing, because that, I remember early on, I had a conversation with somebody inside OpenAI early on, before they were really a household name, and they were talking about this problem called the heroin problem. This was like a thought experiment, and they were saying, we're going to make a universal, like a perfect personal assistant, an AI personal assistant. And the heroin problem was, what do you do if the person using the assistant has an addiction to heroin? Do you facilitate the addiction? Do you get them off of heroin? What's the assistant supposed to do as a product, And this is a fundamental ethical problem that no one has still solved. And so, anyway, that's something that occurs to me as you say that.
What struck me was the specificity of March 2028, which seemed like a very specific month, a couple of years from now. It seemed unusual that they would choose that so specifically. But when it comes to the question of values alignment and, universal values or what have you, I think what he's talking about here is, you can give it a task, like, we want you to solve the climate crisis. find a way to reshape our climate and our industry to do X, Y, Z, and I don't know, figure out a transition from here to there. Which one could imagine the prompt itself would include implicitly or explicitly a series of values, a series of principles, trade-offs, design goals, success criteria, what have you. And then one would presume that the answer, whether it takes days, weeks, months, years, would then be supervised by human beings who have to go implement it, right? So if any misalignment with our societal or societal values would be caught at that point. So in this particular case, I'm not so concerned about values so much as I am interested in multi-year breakthrough scientific research. It's a very big claim with a very specific month, 2 years from now. That struck me as a particularly interesting thing to put out there on a live stream.
It strikes me as pretty suspicious, right? Like I feel like OpenAI is entering its vaporware phase. Like, there were predictions of PhD level researchers in 2025, not that long ago, coming from OpenAI, and now it's March 2028. And when we talk about the AI bubble, I feel there is something here that speaks to this. It's nearly like a leaf out of Elon Musk's playbook. Announce something quite far in the future that seems really amazing, that keeps people excited. But everybody listening to this knows that even much simpler projects, 2 years out, there is no way you can give a prediction with this much accuracy. And the question to me, from a sort of corporate strategy point of view, is why would you even make an announcement like this? Confident actors tend to announce things that are ready, not announce things that are not going to be around for another 2.5 years, in the best case. So I'm like, it feels like an odd thing to me to be promising. And to me, it ties up with this overall hype train that OpenAI sees that they really need to manifest the future by keeping the excitement up and just pulling in these vast sums of capital in order to be able to keep doing what they're doing.
I don't want to be cynical here, but I just will point out that March 2028, President Trump will still be in office, right? And that's and I wonder if there's something strategic about, announcing a thing that will happen on his watch. There might be something there about the specificity as well.
I agree with you both, which is, it does seem actually like hype. It seems like an Elon Musk playbook. It's something I haven't seen them quite do before. They've obviously talked about the possibilities and they've talked about the hopes and dreams. They've never said, we think we're going to deliver this particular thing on this particular month in this particular year, 2 years from now. That seems particularly unrealistic if you've built anything at a scale ever before. All right, well, let's talk about the next section of the live stream. They talked about ChatGPT as part of their product layer. Really, the most interesting takeaway there is that they said that we're starting to think of ChatGPT as a platform. And, we talked about this a couple episodes ago when they launched apps in ChatGPT. And, Yaniv, you and I spoke about the pillars of a platform, the idea of creating more value for the ecosystem than the platform vendor, which is something he stated explicitly in the presentation. You have to leave a lot of money on the table for the ecosystem to benefit. And he said, really, ChatGPT, our focus for ChatGPT is turning it into a platform. And that struck me also as interesting in a different way. I think it's actually the right attitude for ChatGPT. If you want to create magic, you create a great product. If you want to create a lasting legacy and weave yourself into the fabric of the world, you have to create a platform. And I think the latest apps feature they released is sort of the first inkling of that. So what do you guys think of ChatGPT, not just as a product, but as a platform for third-party innovation?
Well, I'll just say, I clearly it is it's I think a very smart business strategy, right? You're creating a reliance on the part of whole industries on your product, right? And you're going to have not just ship after ship, but navy after navy built on your system, right? On your boats. And so to my mind, there's it makes a lot of sense there. I think for me, there was some interesting stuff just as somebody who watches the evolution of this, not just as a business, but as a sort of agent of social change, this idea that there's going to be, the other thing they sort of emphasized alongside, this idea that there's going to be this kind of, that 1 million ships are going to sail, using this technology, is that each of those captains gets to make their own choices. So there's a lot of stuff about user freedom all of a sudden, that there will be adult creative modes, and that, there'll be sort of, global customization, all this sort of user freedom rhetoric. And the idea that it's going to be not just a productivity tool, but an emotional companion, which is something they brought up, which to my mind is as someone who just sort of like is watching young people become increasingly dependent on this stuff. We saw last week numbers come out of OpenAI about how many people are developing a really serious emotional dependence on the product. And it's interesting to watch something that really so clearly convinces so many people that it is their friend, their companion, their assistant, much more than just a sort of simple productivity tool. So the combination of those two things, that it's going to be built into all these other businesses, and it is clearly taking on this very anthropomorphized kind of form, I think means it's going to be very deeply baked into all corners of the economy and all corners of people's lives.
I think that there are a couple of things here. Like, the first is that when you have a lot of distribution, becoming a platform, this is a very old tale in the world of technology. This is pretty much the playbook. So there's nothing very new or unique to AI here. OpenAI have a lot of distribution through ChatGPT, and they want to take advantage of that distribution by effectively selling it to other people, to other developers, to other businesses, and thereby also making their product and their platform stickier for all the people who use it. So it's a wonderful business and monetization flywheel, and of course you would do this, right? I would note that one of the issues, and I keep touching on this with OpenAI, is that I see them as being very vulnerable as a business. Actually, there has never been a business that has been both so powerful and so tenuous in its hold on the future as OpenAI, right? Because they are burning unprecedented amounts of cash. Their commitments of over $1 trillion in infrastructure spending are completely without precedent. And their research, the quality of their models, that there has been a convergence, right? That there is a lot of competition and potentially a degree of commodification around the core AI model technology. So their distribution advantage with ChatGPT, which interestingly, they got by accident, right? ChatGPT was just supposed to be a technology demo, and it went viral. That is, I won't say it's all they've got, but it's a big part of their competitive advantage. And so they have no choice but to leverage that absolutely to the hilt. And so that's what they're doing.
The question you're asking, Yaniv, is, are they going to be Netscape, or are they going to be Internet Explorer? Are they going to be Yahoo, or are they going to be Google? Right? Are they going to be pets.com, or are they going to be Amazon? Because there have been plenty of companies in previous cycles where it seems like they have a lock on everything. They have all the valuation, they have all the hype, they have all the excitement, but it was all for nothing in the end, because they were the Nokia, not the iPhone, right? But what strikes me is, if you're going to build a device or a family of devices, which they are, and you're going to try to compete with the mobile phone, which I suspect they're going to try, you need a methodology, a mechanism, a user experience, and a framework, an architecture that responds to the question of, what about all my apps, right? If you're not going to have one would imagine, if it's a chat-based or AI-based device, it's not going to have a screen of icons. What it's going to have is, it's going to have a conversational interface. And then that conversational interface needs to know which app to load and how. It needs to be able to load those interfaces, those screens, those workflows within itself, within the interface. So I think not only is turning ChatGPT into a platform the basic playbook for any good piece of software with any good distribution, it also seems mandatory on a path to building a device. Because as we've talked, we've affectionately kind of named this thing ChatGPT for devices, right? They're going to launch some version of an operating system powered by ChatGPT. That thing will likely be a conversational first interface, and it will then need to load third-party apps organically, naturally in the chat, to make up for to not differentiate, but to take the app model to the next level. This is basic software, internet, Silicon Valley strategy, but what does it mean when you combine the personal relationship, the AI of it all, the intelligence of it all, and put it in people's pockets?
Well, for me, I mean, the thing that is so, worrisome is that it's interesting to hear you describe, Netscape and Amazon, the rest of them, and all of those are interesting examples from a dollars and cents perspective. But in terms of how this kind of product gets into the minds and into the behavior of people, it is so much more powerful and so much more, convincing, I would say, in its ability to really simulate and play on basic human emotions. I mean, this is the whole, I wrote this book, The Loop, that was all about basically how, if you look at the last 60 years of behavioral science, it's all about the very predictable ways in which people make decisions, and feeding all of that into the world we're about to enter, in which you've got just endless pattern recognition capabilities. I just think we're going to wind up in this really difficult place. So one example, right, is we're already seeing young people using something like ChatGPT as anything from like a kind of life coach all the way through to like a, real mental health counselor. One of the standard things that young people are doing right now is saying, and this is the healthiest version I can think of, I want to be something in 25 years. I want to be a university professor. I want to be whatever. And tell me, ChatGPT, each day what to do to get to that place. And that's the most benign sort of version of that, all the way up to people who are truly using it as like a romantic companion, a mental health companion. And so for me, when I look at the incentives of a company that wants this to be as deep in someone's life as they can, but is playing now suddenly with something where there's a certain significant, statistically significant number of people who are not going to be able to tell the difference between having a real human relationship and having a relationship with this product. That's great business and tough on society, it seems to me. I was just talking to somebody the other day, today, in fact, a psychologist, the University of Haifa. There's a big research came out of there in 2002 where they coined this term maladaptive daydreaming. And it is this weird technical term for when you basically have a kind of invented imaginary friend, kids would call them, that you use as a sort of confidant. It's a very sort of unusual but a documented psychological thing. And one of the hallmarks of it is that people have much less enthusiasm for being connected with real people. It takes away, it like scratches a little bit of a social itch, but it doesn't actually give you enough that you want to have the real thing. And I really worry about that across all the different places that this kind of technology is going to start playing out. Because this is a company that wants it to be in people's lives. And I think it's going to be very, very deeply in people's lives.
So actually, to follow on from that, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in the live stream because there's still some points he made about infrastructure and the nonprofit. But to your point, Jacob, around people falling in love with or depending on emotionally this thing, they had a Q&A at the end. And I think without exaggeration, basically every question was about why did you take away 4.0? 4.0 was better. How dare you change the personality of this thing?
Right.
We loved this thing.
Right.
You guys are lying to us about what model is being used underneath. And it was every single question. Yep. Maybe there was one exception. What it showed to me was that there was a large, or let's say a vocal community of people who got onto this live stream to do nothing but just to continue to shout at them that they loved, but in one way or another, loved, either, literally felt feelings of love or were emotionally attached to 4.0 and were just wanting to vent and see Sam Altman reply to it. It was struck me as quite interesting because they opened up the Q&A and said, like, we're just going to take these questions like FIFO, like first in, first out. And it was clear there was no curation because every question was just about 4.0. And so, to your point, there are people who are feeling extremely emotionally attached to these things.
Yeah, and and on the one hand, like a business leader looks at that and must feel unbelievable envy, right? And certain people inside OpenAI must feel unbelievable pride that that's the case. I know Sam Altman has, in his public statements, has felt that way. But I bet, but I and thousands of social and behavioral scientists around the world watched that and went, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into? So the business incentives and the social incentives here, I think, are beginning to diverge.
To what extent, Jacob, do you see an analogy between what you were just talking about and the previous era of social media as led by Facebook, now Meta, where we're dealing with the consequences of that, perhaps the misalignment between what is commercially most valuable to those businesses and what is best for society. I know there are a lot of places now that are talking about social media bans for children. In fact, Australia, where I live, is just about to put one into law.
That's right.
And so, do you see there being a parallel? And also, how do you compare, I guess, the potential magnitude of the social impact of something like this compared to social media?
Well, I think that the one really common thread that I keep coming back to with social media and with the development of AI as a commercial product is, there's this assumption when you come up through software as a business training, there's this assumption that scale solves your problems and that you will work out the bugs and the edge cases over time, and it will and you'll create a stronger and stronger product by releasing it to more and more and more people. But what we learned with social media, and what I think we're about to learn even more so with AI, is it's actually, in this case, going to compound your problems. It's more like hardware. That if anything, you take, really, really, tough, scary behavior, and you create a whole market for it. That's what social media created, right? And in this case, there's going to be patterns that will emerge in how people use this stuff in difficult and dangerous ways. That's going to create a whole market around that. And to my mind, that that's one of for me, the sort of the toughest things. I think, though, that already, right? We've just seen there are already there's the models that most people are familiar with. There's ChatGPT, and there's Perplexity, and the rest of them. Now people are starting to make their own weird little versions of it. Musk has his own Grok, version, was the first one where it's got its own weird political biases and worldview. You've got people feeding alternative medicine publications into this new model called Enoch that's supposed to be your sort of like wellness and health thing, and each of these is going to be its own. I just think people's information bubble is about to get even tighter, way tighter than it was even with social media. And to my mind, I think that could be a really problematic thing, not to mention the incredible world of AI slop we're about to live in, where you're never going to believe video evidence again. Truly that President Trump has boasted about, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and they'd still like me. Well, you'd be able to film him now and no one will believe it. Right, that's the world we're about to enter. So to my mind, I think it's got a lot of the hallmarks of that stuff, and is about to, I think, compound a lot of those problems.
All right, and so the next part of the live stream was about infrastructure, and if you look at the dollars being spent in AI, and if you want to call it a bubble, and actually today as we speak, there's been a massive correction, from 5-6% down, maybe maybe 2-4% on the Mag 7. If you want to talk about the bubble, the big part of this is infrastructure spending, right? Spending on GPUs and power and data centers and what have you. Well, he's saying that they have an intention, not a commitment, but an intention to build 1 gigawatt of capacity a week. And they're not just building sort of these AI factories, as Jensen Huang calls them, these token factories. They're building infrastructure factories to produce, token factories to produce data centers. And again, he was, clear to point out this is not actually a commitment here. They have made commitments in the past, but this is their sense of the scale of it and where they're headed towards. Again, a little bit of hype, little bit of puffing up the balloon, little bit of kind of getting people excited, but I have no doubt this is sort of where their head's at, and if their best and biggest hopes and dreams play out. So what do you guys think about all this infrastructure spending and these goals? I mean, they're not the only ones, obviously. Meta and Microsoft and Amazon, and they're all, they're breaking a lot of ground on a lot of big data centers.
I would say 1 gigawatt, Chris, is not even enough to power a single flux capacitor. So are they even trying? They could have said 1.21 gigawatts, and then I would have been impressed.
Didn't Elon Musk recently in the last 12 months or so, announce something that was 1.21 gigawatts? I'm almost certain.
Well, yeah, that would have been the first funny thing he's ever done if it was.
Well, not the first funny thing. He does a lot of funny things that are like, what was it? Plaid speed and, 420 and sexy, the name of the models when you line them up. He does all sorts of stupid shit that's funny.
Yeah, most of it doesn't make me laugh, though. Anyhow, so yeah, I come back to my point about OpenAI's vulnerability here. They are trying to brute force the future with this sort of vertically integrated infrastructure blitz that costs trillions of dollars, and they are a loss-making company. The only way they can even possibly achieve this is by somehow continuing to attract vast sums of outside capital. And they are competing against companies like Microsoft and Google that are actually massively profitable, that can actually deploy a lot of their own capital. So they're kind of vulnerable here. And the other thing is, like, when you're in this world this deep in physical infrastructure, when you're talking about energy and transmission and generation and all the regulation that goes around that, it's pretty hard if you just look at the power generation aspect of this. This is like putting a new nuclear power plant online every couple of weeks.
Yep.
How's that going to happen? Is OpenAI, even with the depth of their pockets, really the company to make that happen? I'm not convinced.
I think Sam Altman believes the way he's going to do it is through his fusion company that he's invested in. I think it's called Halo Energy. He's also invested in energy companies, in particular fusion, and so he thinks he's going to have another breakthrough there as well, I'd say.
I'm sure there's some idea, right, that, the product will somehow lead to fusion in that way. That's right.
Correct.
I mean, that's right. I'm looking here at, like, they're committing to 30 gigawatts of compute, and that's about 30 nuclear plants worth of power. Like, right now, there are only 54 operating nuclear power plants in the United States. And if you imagine that each of these companies is going to need this kind of power, right? The amount of nuclear capability you would have to build is so out of control. I went just last year, I spent a weekend with a convention of, it was a meeting of all of the electricity grid administrators in, like, rural America. These are the people that are in charge of the very grids that are going to have to be upgraded to get what they want, in theory, built. These enormous data centers in the middle of nowhere. And, those folks were just talking to me about how hard it is to upgrade the infrastructure, how long that takes, how vulnerable those systems are. They're the ones who deal with the crazy people who shoot up the substations and the rest of it. Not to mention how random and capricious and long the process is to get federal regulators to say yes to a new nuclear power plant. I've interviewed the people who are trying to get those power plants off the ground, and they just say, it is the craziest thing in the world to try and get, approval for this stuff. So yeah, the idea that this is going to happen, never mind, as you point out, Yaniv, the money, right? How are they going to make that back, right? They say that somehow cheaper intelligence is going to drive exponential demand, and that'll create more users, which will create more computation, that they'll somehow endlessly scale. But no, there's a runway here, and I don't know how they're going to get, I don't know. I think they're going to reach the end of it before they maybe expect.
This reminds me of the moon landing. And the space race. It reminds me of the internet rollout, right? Whether this plays out the way that, our collective hopes and dreams can imagine, certainly Sam Altman's hopes and dreams can imagine, right? Artificial general intelligence and so on. Whether it plays out like that or not, what it is going to do, at the very least, is accelerate a whole bunch of transformational change. And a Cambrian explosion of innovation and infrastructure and funding and what have you, to, in some cases, refresh and upgrade all of our baseline stuff, right? And whether you like him or hate him, and I think it's clear, at least for Yaniv and I, we hate him, Trump is brushing away a lot of, like, regulation and, red tape to basically say, do whatever the hell you want. Just go faster. And stuff that actually, I think Democrats have hesitated on for a little too long. And so I do think that those are the kind of the competition with China, the space race for AGI, the needs of AGI in terms of power and infrastructure and new breakthroughs in energy generation. I think these are just net good for society. If the whole AGI thing turns into nothing, upgrading our power and upgrading our transmission lines and upgrading the grids and it's just sort of net good. Where I think the real risk is obviously overbuilding. I don't think that's going to be where it goes. The other risk is investors getting wiped out when a bubble pops. And the other is the infrastructure being half rolled out when the bubble pops. And you end up with this sort of mishmash half thing. But if we get all this dark fiber, like we did from the dot-com bubble, that then, we absorb, we consume, we flood with interesting video content over time, I think that will ultimately be net good for us, even if the best stuff doesn't play out.
It's an interesting point. I haven't thought about that part. I think for me, I worry a little bit about falling short of. I mean, first of all, like we just don't have the global agreements in place, and I guess we're no longer abiding by global agreements, so maybe it doesn't matter. But we signed an agreement that said that we wouldn't ever throw nuclear waste into the ocean, and burying it in the abyssal trench is the only place you can really put it. And so even if we were to bring on 30 new nuclear power plants per big company doing this stuff, we're going to need a place to put all that nuclear waste. You know what I mean?
This is a different topic, though. So the nuclear power plants we have right now were designed so long ago. Those things are using, Soviet era technology in 2025. Right. There is new modern power plants that actually can consume nuclear waste as fuel and are more static, and they're much safer, and the waste is much less, and there's all sorts of ways to make nuclear safer, cleaner, better than it's ever been before. And so I actually think the problem, we've had a massive period of time, especially in the US, not in China, where nuclear is put on the back bench, and it's caused all sorts of pain and suffering for no good reason. Nuclear can be innovated on, has been innovated on, and Bill Gates has been spending years, if not decades, trying to explain to people that nuclear isn't the apocalypse that people. It's got a bad branding problem, and I can't remember the exact timescales, but the plants that were built whatever in the 50s or something. They were designed in the 40s, right? So they were designed a decade before that. So the technology is so old. And there's just so much better stuff out there right now. And so, no, clearing the way for these new kinds of nuclear power plants, having a forcing function for fusion or fission, there's accelerating, solar rollouts and battery technology. This can only, I think, be net good for us. Hey, before we get back into the show, a quick reminder. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications, and spread the word about the podcast. It helps us grow the show, which in turn helps us help more founders like you. Thanks so much. Okay, with that, back to the show. The next part of the live stream was they gave an update on the non-profit. And, it seemed much more reasonable than everybody's, biggest fears and disaster pontificating. He said basically the non-profit is going to control the benefit company, the public benefit company. It's in control of what it does, so it continues to be sort of at the steering wheel. And that non-profit will have a lot of derived value from the profit company, being a major shareholder and controller of it. And it has they're announcing, or they're in this particular live stream, they spoke about two major areas of investment that the nonprofit will be pursuing. The first is using AI to cure diseases. So they will have a whole sort of stream of work and investment around curing diseases with AI. And the other is AI resilience. And they described AI resilience as something that is is larger than the idea of AI safety. They're saying that we can't really control the safety equation for everything and everyone because we're only building our models. And so what we actually need to do is not just invest in AI safety in our models, but invest in AI resilience against bad actors with their models. And so he said, just the way they described it, and I think this is a great analogy, is just like the antivirus and cybersecurity ecosystem sprung up to defend against cyber attacks. There needs to be a sort of AI resilience, AI security infrastructure apparatus and tool chain that springs up to help defend against the worst downsides of AI. And so he said, these are not the only things the nonprofit will invest in, but they're the two that we have sort of thought through most thoroughly so far. So what do you guys think about this, the non-profit, the whole thing, the whole maneuver just to move into the non-profit, and sort of this update that it'll still be the controlling party and it'll invest in these two sort of altruistic long-range missions or investments?
I mean, for me, for my part, like the structure of this place has always been so confusing. I knew people inside OpenAI who cared a lot about it being a nonprofit and really believed sort of, I think it was a big part of the recruitment mechanism was we're doing good for the world. We're not here to make money. We're here to make positive change. And I know that a fair number of people have been internally disillusioned by that change. I don't know. I don't know yet how people are reacting internally to this. To this shift. But I certainly understand why they are shifting the way they are. Like the way they had it, they weren't going to be. The idea that it was going to be a nonprofit, at the center of this incredible vortex of trillions of dollars of investment made no sense to me. So I can understand the logistics of it. I wonder how that's going to change the culture of the place.
I mean, to me, it feels like this is just it's a formality in a sense that clearly OpenAI was not operating in the way a nonprofit would operate already, right? So it's like, I think if you were going to be disillusioned, you were already disillusioned by that. And now we've just made it official. OpenAI is a for-profit company. That's great. I would also say the idea that the nonprofit controls the for-profit entity is somewhat laughable, right? That was tested when the board of the nonprofit tried to oust Sam Altman last year, and ultimately they failed at that. And so I think that is, that is just face saving. The thing that is interesting for me is I believe that this nonprofit now has effectively, through its ownership of OpenAI shares at the latest valuation, has an endowment of $135 billion, which I believe makes it the wealthiest nonprofit on earth. And so that's kind of cool. It'll be interesting to see what they do with this. I think what this does mean is that the nonprofit does become at least somewhat independent of the for-profit entity because they've now been separated in this way. I think doing research into curing disease is cool. I think doing research into AI resilience is, I don't know, darkly comical, for want of a better term. It's just sort of like, okay, so we've got this company that's busy making a mess, and as a nonprofit, our mission is going to be to try to clean up that mess, rather than perhaps considering not making that mess in the first place. I think that is interesting.
Look, guys, I think we're being very, very cynical about this whole thing. I think, you can't, it's like saying, well, the internet created a mess of cybersecurity vulnerabilities and spam, and we shouldn't have made the internet. Like, give me a break. Come on. The genie's out of the bottle. Everyone knew, anyone who picked up a sci-fi book knew that AI is coming. Someone was going to make it. And it's not going to stop now. You can describe it as a mess, or you can describe it as a new
but it's kind of like
tool.
the nonprofit branch of a gun company, like having a sort of like gun death prevention program. I'm like,
the analog to guns, the analog to guns is not an appropriate analog. Guns are designed to kill people. Okay. Cars kill people too, but they have a net social benefit. Cigarettes are designed to kill people. I know they're not designed to, but that's all they do. So, guns, cigarettes, you regulate into oblivion. Cars, the internet, and AI, you don't. Like, this is basic math. There is a massive upside. And so, yes, you have to work to mitigate the downside. And I, for one, would rather them working on it than not. They're not going to stop working on AI. No one is. That doesn't make any sense.
I think the only way the only sort of place I would try and cut something in between what the two of you are saying there, though, is I think it also has to do with the attitude that a company takes toward the effects of its products. So if, I've talked to people who work at the companies that, for instance, build casino simulators that get, elderly women addicted to, blowing all the money they possibly have, right? And when you speak to people inside those companies, very often they say, well, this is what people do. And so I've just made a product that accomplishes, that makes the most of how people are. So to my mind, it's this question of like
intent.
Yeah, intent and what personal boundaries do you feel there need to be around this kind of thing, and there are, and I think there are big cultural differences between some of these players, and OpenAI is not known as a place, from the people that I've spoken to who've worked there, it's not a place that, I think they do have people there who think about the effects, but I think they also have a lot of people in positions of leadership who don't necessarily think about those effects. They just think about the positive future that is coming, and the mess in the meantime is worth getting to that positive future. And, it's the difference in attitude around that I think makes what Yaniv is saying less, I don't take as much exception to the analogy that he is drawing, simply because some companies just don't care about the effects, or at least feel that the effects are worth what is coming. And I don't know, the jury's out yet as to whether OpenAI is a steward of the future or just making the most out of how people are.
Yeah, I guess it feels like, if I'm, I don't want to misrepresent your guys' position, but it feels like you guys have both made up your mind that OpenAI, their intent is not biased towards good. And I think what you said there, Jacob, is right, is the jury is still out. I think you can ascribe their behavior, which is, fast forwarding to releasing products and models. You can ascribe and also transforming into a for profit. You can ascribe sort of ill intent to that. You can take Sam Altman's words and think of them as, showmanship or artifice, or, he's full of shit. I think that's all reasonable and maybe clear-eyed and grounded. Or you could also say that's actually quite cynical. They may earnestly believe that they should be releasing this early and often so that humans get familiar with it and society gets familiar with it, which, by the way, I think is playing out. They've been asking for reasonable regulation. He speaks always and often about the ethical dilemma, even though he maybe doesn't have a very sophisticated view on it. They've talked about the ills of social media and how they don't want to repeat those business models and those bad incentives. So, I'm not defending them. I'm saying the jury's out.
I agree with you. And yeah, so I think to a certain extent you are misrepresenting the position, because I'm not saying that they have ill intent. If anything, I'm saying that they're being a bit cavalier, right? That yes, perhaps their intentions are good, but they're not being particularly cautious. And also with the non-profit, like I do think it's a bit rich. It's like, oh, we have the non-profit that's going to investigate AI resilience. I'm like, no, the for-profit company is busy building their AI. Clean up your own fucking mess. Spend your own money out of your own business model to actually make sure that what you're doing is not going to impact societal resilience. Don't farm that out. Don't abdicate that responsibility to the non-profit.
Firstly, I don't think that they're being cavalier. I think they're being aggressive. Okay, so you can spend all day wrought with indecision.
He's splitting hairs at this point.
No, I'm not. You can spend all day wrought with indecision, analyzing the problem from 17,000 different directions in an academic setting, or you can put shit out there and see what actually happens and then figure out how to mitigate the worst downsides. And the Silicon Valley approach is move fast and break things. So yes, they are going to break society. That's the model. But to say like they are aware of, conscious of, and working towards some of the most obvious downsides. And so cavalier, I always, the litmus test I always use is, would I do something different in their shoes? If I had the opportunity to build AGI, I call it lightning in a bottle, I had infinite dollars, I would also be trying to put out useful products that change the world and observing the downsides and trying to mitigate them as fast as I can. That's not cavalier. That's trying to make an impact and not being stuck and wrought with academic indecision.
Chris, you will hate the book that I am writing next.
Great.
The title of it, let me tell you the title. It's going to make your head pop off. It's called Great Ideas We Should Not Pursue. It's literally that concept. It'll make you'll hate this book. And so, yes, I think we are definitely, I think that the difference in perspective here is the difference between, do you just build it and then sort out the problems, or do you try to anticipate those problems and decide as a result whether to build it?
My point is, you can try to anticipate the problems, and any good human would and will and is. But you can't anticipate all the problems because it's academic and it's theoretical. The entire point of Silicon Valley model of Agile is you can spend all day in a business plan trying to figure out what you're going to do, and all of it is for naught, because everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. So you can try to anticipate, and you can do your very best thinking, judgment, taste, and quality execution, which the audience will know I love. But then you ultimately have to just put it in the world and see what happens. And so they're doing both. They've spent an enormous amount of their sort of public-facing dialogue talking about the safety concerns and the moral implications and the whatever. They have whole AI safety teams working on this stuff. They're investing in the AI resilience track. But for them to be sitting there, I love Kara Swisher always says this kind of shit. They should have known ahead of time. They could have known. They would have known. Thank you, Kara. You've never run anything at scale. Sit down. Running things at scale is hard. It's really, really hard. And the idea that OpenAI by itself is going to build an industry of AI resilience is also, I think, not engaging with the facts. They're building their own AI safety tools, but the idea of a global ecosystem, an industry around AI resilience, that doesn't take one company. That takes a nonprofit. It takes investments in multiple efforts. It takes local efforts and local programs. I think the nonprofit is exactly where that meta effort should live. It's very easy to be standing outside the tent and pissing in. It's very easy. And if you are not or have not run things at scale, it's even easier to make sort of naive assertions about thinking about stuff ahead of time.
But this is the man in the arena argument, right? Being in the arena comes with responsibilities. Running a really big company at scale comes with responsibilities. I think Kara Swisher, for the most part, is bang on. I don't know what your beef is with her. I think she's a good journalist who makes really valid points.
All she does is get on MSNBC or whatever and say, "Oh yeah, I know those guys. I hung out with those guys, and they're just boys." They just do. Boys are going to do what boys do.
Okay. Like I said, you seem to have some sort of personal beef with her that I do not understand. But moving on from that, I think, yes, with great power comes great responsibility. I would also question whether, and this is to Jacob's point, yes, the Silicon Valley model is move fast and break things. Maybe not all ideas are suitable for the Silicon Valley model. Right? Like we've got, you didn't like when I brought up guns before, but we now have weapons companies like Anduril who are following the Silicon Valley model. Are we saying it's okay for them to move fast and break things when they're making weaponry? I don't think so. Like I think when you are dealing with dangerous things, you do have a greater duty of care than just breakneck growth and kind of socialize the costs and privatize the profits. Like there is a greater level of responsibility than that.
Just to try to tie this off, because I think this is it's a really important debate. What you guys are in my screen, literally on either side of me, and it is a very. I'm glad that you guys are fighting about this exact issue, because if everybody feels like only one of you, then we're not going to make any progress. The thing that I have seen in my time as a journalist is exemplified by. I once interviewed David Holtz, the head of Midjourney, right when that company first launched. And he was already trying to deal with the fallout from all of the image generation that was starting to show then candidate Trump in orange jumpsuits and all of this stuff, right? And I was asking him, well, what are you going to do about this? Is this your problem? And he said, I just don't feel like I sort of, he basically said, I'm trying to make the best assumptions about people. And the point of this is to move as fast as I can and try and make the best possible impact I can, and we'll sort of deal with it as we go. And he said at one point, by way of analogy, he said, if I'm, in the muffin making business and I make 10,000 muffins and somebody gets food poisoning, am I supposed to stop making muffins? And there was an awkward pause between us. And I was like, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what the FDA would say. You have to take the muffins off the shelf. You got to go figure out what the problem is, and you can't sell muffins until you figure that out. That's exactly how the rules work in that case. And a few weeks later, I just happened to be at an industrial bakery here in the Bay Area called Semifrades. And they are, one of a million bakeries around the world that operate in this little region. And it's a very fresh to market kind of product. And at the very end of the tour that he gave me, the guy who runs it, showed me the final step that every single croissant, every single bag of granola goes through, and it's a metal detector. And I was like, metal detector? What do you got a metal detector for? And he was like, well, because eventually one of these machines is going to throw a bolt. And when a bolt winds up in a croissant and somebody bites into it, that's the end of my business. It's an intolerable number of croissants to have a bolt in. And there is no going back and apologizing for it at that point. It'll ruin my business. And so to my mind, there's this real question we're at right now, which is, are we going to think about the duty of care at the level of, glitchy software, or are we going to think about the duty of care at the level of breakfast? And it's not clear to me yet where it should fall on that spectrum.
The difference between a croissant and software is that software are multi-purpose, multi-use tools. And they're tools that democratize superpowers for everybody. And so the real question is only degrees of democratization.
You should see what I can do with a croissant, Chris, especially one with a bolt in it.
We have some great croissants around here. I don't know, maybe you're getting some sub-quality croissants.
But what we're really talking about is degrees of democratization of superpowers, right? So if does Microsoft have a duty of care with Microsoft Paint to make sure that disinformation and fake imagery is not created? No. Does Adobe have a duty of care with Adobe Photoshop? No. Does some of the best 3D software packages, animation packages out there that make, the Avengers, do they have a duty of care to make sure that their 3D software is not being used to simulate terrible 3D destruction of fake imagery? We would probably agree, no. And so at what point does ChatGPT or Midjourney have a duty of care to defend and protect against the kind of imagery it can create? And it seems to me the difference here is about how broadly democratized is the superpower of manufacturing imagery, or how broadly democratized is the superpower of distribution and platforming people, or how broadly is the superpower of distributing ads on Meta to drive certain, political consensus. And so there is this very fuzzy line of who deserves these superpowers and what guardrails must the superpower toolmakers apply. And I don't, we're all agreeing here. I'm not saying anything new to what you just said, Jacob, which is it's not clear to us, to anyone, where the knife in the cake must go. And many of the downsides.
If you buy a cake with a knife in the middle, that's definitely
there
against
shouldn't
FDA
be any
standards.
cakes with knives in them. This is the thing. This is Chris. I have utmost respect for your experience and what you're saying, but there is a line somewhere, and I don't think the argument that if you make enough muffins, it's okay if one of them is poisonous.
I'm not saying that.
But the democratization of capacity, the democratization of these superpowers would somehow make it okay for the small number of edge cases, and makes it not the responsibility of the maker of the product to deal with that. I think there's got to be some responsibility somewhere, especially when we're talking here about something that kids are going to use as their emotional companions, that's going to replace, human interaction in a really fundamental way. Adobe, for its part, has a whole content authenticity initiative. They're the industry leader in trying to figure out how to claw back, our understanding of what's real imagery and what's not. So I do think.
You might say they've built some kind of resilience tool chain that defends against the misinformation.
They have, and from the very beginning, they were under fire for that exact thing.
But Photoshop is not going to stop you from making a Donald Trump image, right?
No, but these days, as all of the experts in this stuff that I speak to say, from the earliest days, it should have been that the phone watermarked each shot you took, that that it would have been a better move. Now, could we have seen that coming? Maybe not, but I sure wish there'd just been a little more thinking about that in advance than this idea that if the edge cases are a small enough fraction, then it's okay to do whatever.
I think we're actually enthusiastically agreeing, Jacob. You said, could we have seen that coming? Probably not. And that's my point. You cannot see all of this stuff coming. And when you service millions of people and billions of interactions a day, even a 1% edge case occurs a lot. And you can be frozen in indecision, or you can move and you can create mitigating strategies over time for the things you uncover to be true.
It's an excellent debate. I'm glad that we're having it. I appreciate that we're engaging on this topic. Yeah,
me too. This is fun. We got to do. This is what the show's for. This is exactly the debate happening in every boardroom, every VC, every startup founder, everywhere, all around the world. So I'm loving that we can bring it to the show. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the live stream had the Q&A, which I mentioned earlier. And yes, most of the questions were about 4.0, almost all of them. There were two comments that were made as part of the Q&A section that I wanted to touch on. Number one, Sam said, he expects that there will be sort of an ambient AI future, which I think is in the camp of no shit. So, the AI will sort of be everywhere. You can sort of just speak, make a wish to the wall or to your device, and some AI somewhere will just sort of respond and give you what you need. That seems relatively obvious and straightforward. We've already seen that with Google Home and Siri and whatever. And then the other thing that, and by the way, I think their family of devices are probably, that is the mission statement, is how do we make AI ambient? I think they're going to have a device for every scenario and use case. They're going to want to stick one in your home, in your bedroom, in your living room, and in your pocket. And that's my guess. The other thing that he said, which was a bit more interesting to me, was I think he touched on the revenue mix for OpenAI and sort of their health as a business. And he mentioned that they expect a part of their revenue mix to be coming from scientific breakthroughs. He didn't go to specifics, but I've had conversations with people about this. I would imagine it'd be either licensing scientific IP that is generated by their large language models, or maybe even creating new kinds of whatever materials or science or power or what have you, and monetizing it more directly. And so it's interesting to me that he's thinking of new kinds of scientific breakthroughs contributing meaningfully to their revenue mix in one way or another. That struck me as a new piece of information that I hadn't heard from him before.
I feel like I don't know enough about how, we've seen, what is it, Novartis, isn't it Novo Novartis, right, has like a huge foundational science arm. And it's out of that foundational science work that was very speculative for a long time. I think made that company no money for a long time. But it's out of that Ozempic came, which is now the linchpin of that company's revenue mix, right? And so I don't know enough about there are areas in medicine certainly and pharma where you could imagine that money coming back. But the places that I want them to point this stuff is like the stars. And I don't know that we're getting any money back from the stars, or from, the history of, from archaeology or any of these other very worthy sciences that could benefit enormously from this stuff. So I don't know enough about that. I hope that enough, cancer breakthroughs can come through and somehow we reinvent managed care in this country such that it really can both give everybody the treatment they need and make the money back. I hope that's true, but I don't know enough about how real science can, and I'm just speaking as a guy who used to be the editor-in-chief of Popular Science magazine. I'm not sure that there's enough money in foundational science to pay back even the money they've spent already or are on deck to spend so far. I don't know.
Maybe that's where the nonprofit fits in again, Jacob.
Maybe so. Maybe that's the whole thing.
A very richly endowed nonprofit.
Maybe that's the Novo Novartis, nonprofit arm that somehow creates the thing that pays for everything. Yeah, I don't know.
But I think that, the interesting question here is that OpenAI, when they talk about this stuff, it's such a strong degree of vertical integration that they're aiming for, going all the way from generating electricity all the way through to generating scientific breakthroughs at the other end, and all of the layers and layers in between. And vertical integration can be powerful. It can also be expensive. And the question at each layer of the stack you need to ask yourselves is there any reason to think that we will be good at this and that it will be in some sense additive to the business, right? Or, that it sort of contributes more to the sum of its parts. Is the fact that OpenAI is really good at building foundation models and really good at building data centers, does that mean they'll be good at pointing those AIs at scientific breakthroughs? And does it mean they'll be good at commercializing those breakthroughs? It is not immediately apparent to me that they will be, and it is just another source of capex. And so, it's lovely to talk about this stuff, but again, I come back to, where is all the money going to come from to build these things? Is it just a bit of a kind of peanut buttering effect here, where they're trying to do too many things at once, and this is yet another one?
Yeah, well, I mean, to talk about, to respond to what you said, Jake, about where's the money there? I mean, depending on the business model, there's money sort of everywhere, right? The whole economy is powered by breakthrough science, from healthcare and breakthrough drugs, where there's sort of infinite money to solve every ailment you can imagine, through to, cheap, clean energy production from fusion to otherwise, just maybe optimizing nuclear or coal or solar, to, climate tech, carbon sequestration and climate modification and desalination, and like, holy shit, this the problems that could solve and therefore the revenue it could generate is off the charts. My mind always goes to material science, which is something that I think is severely undervalued. So much breakthrough innovation is rooted in just new and novel materials, new kinds of medical devices, new kinds of batteries, but smaller, better motors, glass that is more efficient, that it can actually collect sunlight and turn it into energy. Like, holy shit! And then space. You said, I don't know where the money is in space. Massive floating asteroids filled with rare earth minerals that they could make the richest person on the planet seem like a child playing in their sandpit. So yeah, the question is not where's the money. The question is, do they have the capacity to execute this, commercialize this, and are they the ones to do it? That's a big fat who the hell knows. And it's probably along the theme of the earlier stuff we talked about, which is very Elon Musk like, don't worry, we've got this, and we're gonna bring your science fiction future into the present. So, yeah, a little bit of hype.
I would definitely say that like the theme of our conversation here has to do with just how speculative the announcements this week were. Right? It is such big, ambitious talk. And as the three of us have been discussing over this past hour, right, it is not at all clear how you get the traction to make even a fraction of these promises come true. From the infrastructure to the the revenue generating science to everything else. It is the ambition and vagaries of this company, I think, are as unprecedented as the money.
I think the reason an Elon Musk and a Sam Altman get to make such speculative claims and get away with it is because they've each pulled off one or two minor miracles that people thought were impossible. And then whether they've had a second or third or fourth is debatable, but they've pulled off one or two, right? So I think Elon Musk transformed sort of the transportation energy mix, or electric vehicles went from being a joke to being a serious contender for a massive part of the transportation economy. That's, I think, miracle one. And then the super heavy and the spaceship and all that sort of, and the reusable rockets, I think, was probably miracle number two. Self-driving vehicles, was sort of half a miracle. It keeps claiming it's real. It's not really that real, or not as real as he'd like it to be, and taken much, much longer. I think Sam Altman, if you'd asked anybody the day before ChatGPT launched, when will the Turing test be passed? I think the answer would have been 10 or 20 years, right? To create a device, create an algorithm, create a piece of software that even comes close to passing the Turing test, I think it was a miracle of our time. And you could argue since then they've made it so much smarter, but people have this feeling that maybe it's asymptoting, maybe it's the diminishing returns. So is there another miracle out of that? Is there a real scientific breakthrough after that? I don't know, any of us can see that. So yeah, I think they've had one or two miracles, and now we're all like salivating at the possibility that the age of miracles is here, and we'll have one a year. But yeah, we don't know. It is very speculative. We'll have to see.
That seems like a nice optimistic note to end a perhaps less optimistic than usual episode of the Startup Podcast Reacts. Jacob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I think the insights and the perspective and the experience you've brought has been incredibly valuable. If people want to learn more about your stuff, they want to follow you, listen to you, read you, where are the best places to go?
Well, I really appreciate it. Yaniv, of course, this has been a really fantastic experience to speak with both of you. I run my own podcast called The Rip Current. We look at big invisible forces at work on us, everything from what is AI going to do to, addiction and addiction recovery, to authoritarian politics, to the science of bias, all of that. I interview a different expert every week. For some reason, I'm big on TikTok. I don't know why these young people want to listen to me, but for some reason, I have a big following on TikTok. Yeah, kids these days, what is their deal? But for some reason, they listen to me some, which I really appreciate. And so, but theripcurrent.com is the best way to find everything about me. And again, I really appreciate this thoughtful conversation. You guys obviously bring a huge amount of horsepower to thinking this stuff through. And I love that you guys have such differing perspectives, but offer this together every week.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's been absolutely great to have you on the show. How about you, Yaniv? How can people find you on the internet?
I'm mostly on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place, and I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. So just hit me up, let me know you come from the podcast, and I will accept your request. How about you, Chris?
Yep, you can find me on all the social media at Chris Sard or on my site, chrissard.com and chrissard.com/newsletter. Jacob, absolute pleasure having you on the show. It's been a fun and healthy and awesome debate, and I think we're going to be struggling with these issues for many days, weeks, and years to come. So that's what the show's for. It's awesome.
I really appreciate it. Cheers to you both.